Something has been shifting in your life lately, and even though no one has said it out loud, you can feel it in the atmosphere. People look at you differently. They behave strangely around you, and their reactions never quite match the situations you're in. That's because, on a spiritual level, they can sense that you know something they hoped you would never notice. And here's the part heaven is allowing me to reveal now, but only halfway. What you know is not just perception, it's a prophecy. But the full truth behind it will only make sense once you hear the rest of this message. This is not a coincidence. You did not stumble on this video randomly. Heaven guided you here because the timing of this revelation is critical. Only a chosen one could carry the kind of awareness you've been walking with, the kind that makes people nervous without you ever opening your mouth. Most people couldn't handle the truth, you see, so God hid the deeper layers from you until the appointed time. And chosen one, that time is unfolding right now. Your whole life, you've sensed things before they happened. You've felt people's intentions before they revealed them. You've read between the lines, while others are still memorizing the script. You've known when something was wrong without proof, and known when something was right without explanation. And the reason your gift felt like a burden is because heaven never opened it all the way, only enough for you to survive the battles you didn't even know you were fighting. But here is the half revelation. People react to you, not because of who you are outwardly, but because of what you carry spiritually. Your silence discerns, your presence is exposed, your awareness unsettles. Many thought you were overthinking, too sensitive, or imagining things, but they felt it. Deep down, they sensed you were seeing through them. They didn't know how much you knew. They only knew they couldn't hide from you. You've walked through seasons of being misunderstood, isolated, and even attacked without reason, and it hurt because you didn't understand why. But heaven did. Every rejection, every strange reaction, every sudden shift in people's behavior was a spiritual confirmation that your discernment was accurate but incomplete. God allowed you to feel what you felt, but He didn't allow you to see the whole picture yet. Not then. But here is the prophetic shift. The rest of that picture is about to be revealed. The full truth behind why you know what you know is preparing to unfold. The deeper layer of your gift, the one heaven kept sealed, is opening. You will not only discern intentions, you will understand purpose. You will not only feel energy, you will identify its source. And you will not only see through people, you will see into destiny. This message is your sign. Before this video ends, I'm going to reveal the one key reason your spiritual awareness has always been ahead of your environment and why God protected your knowledge until now. What's coming next requires a level of perception only a chosen one can carry. If your spirit is resonating, comment 777 as your prophetic act of faith. Like this video, share it, and subscribe not as routine, but as a declaration that you're ready to receive what heaven has been waiting to unveil. Because what comes next is not information, it is a revelation. And you, chosen one, are about to step into the full truth heaven once kept hidden. God's chosen ones, you know something others can't handle. The truth is unveiling. There is a reason, beloved one, that people grow uneasy in your presence. A reason some whisper, some over-explain, some can't hold their own gaze when yours meets theirs with quiet clarity. As one of God's chosen ones, you see the layer beneath the layer, the truth beneath the performance, the intention beneath the tone, and deep down, they know it. They feel it before you ever say a word. Scripture reminds us in Hebrews 4:13 that nothing in all creation is hidden from God's sight and in your life. That spiritual principle echoes itself through your awareness. People sense that around you, their carefully crafted shadows lose their place to hide. It isn't that you're trying to discern anything. You don't pry, you don't interrogate, you don't hunt for what lies beneath the surface. You simply notice the way the eye naturally adjusts to light, or the way a tuning fork resonates with the exact frequency it was designed for. Your spirit vibrates with truth, and anything misaligned with truth rings off-key around you. That resonance unsettles them because they realize you can read the spaces between their words, the cracks in their sentences, the shift in their energy when they thought you weren't paying attention. You pick up the hesitation before the lie, the sudden sweetness after they need something, the brittle smile that collapses under its own insincerity. What amazes them, what frightens them, is how effortlessly it happens. You're not scanning their behavior. You're simply present, attuned, like an ancient cathedral designed to amplify even the faintest whisper. The theologian and poet John Donne once wrote that truth stands on the hill, invincible, and that is exactly how your presence feels to people used to living behind facades. They come prepared to perform, but in front of you, the performance falters. They sense your perception, interrupting the illusion they hope to maintain. And here lies the deeper truth. Some people fear clarity more than confrontation. Confrontation they can prepare for, rehearse, weaponize if needed. But your clarity, that quiet, unforced seeing, leaves them exposed without ever being accused. Michelangelo once said that he carved angels out of marble by removing everything that wasn't them. You, similarly, see the core of a person because your spiritual perception slices through everything unnecessary. You don't remove their masks simply fall off in the presence of your authenticity. You may have wondered, why do they talk so much around me? Why do their voices shake, their explanations run long, their energy shifts nervously, even when I say nothing? This is what happens when your silence becomes a mirror. They don't know what you're thinking, but they know you're thinking something, and that alone unravels their confidence. They're not preparing conversations with you, they're preparing defenses. For those who carry hidden motives, your intuition feels like a spotlight they never consented to stand beneath. One of Jesus' teachings in Matthew 10:16 urges his followers to be wise as serpents and harmless as doves. Your awareness holds that same duality, sharp insight wrapped in gentle presence, discernment that doesn't need to prove itself, wisdom that speaks even when your mouth stays closed. And yet you don't weaponize this gift. You don't expose anyone, you don't embarrass them, you don't air out the darkness you sense. Instead, like a quiet prophet walking through the architecture of human nature, you simply register what is. But because you see the truth, people feel seen in ways they aren't ready to be, and people talk the most when they feel the most exposed. A strange irony lives here. They fear you not because you judge them, but because you don't. You see them clearly and still hold your peace, and that peace, to them, is terrifying. Even the world of art reflects this phenomenon. In one of his letters, the painter Caravaggio wrote that light reveals what darkness fears to confess, and your spirit carries that kind of light, the unintentional revelation, the holy transparency that exposes without effort. And as in many of his paintings, the contrast between shadow and illumination becomes a metaphor for the kind of spiritual contrast your presence creates in others. Scientific metaphors echo this truth as well. In physics, there's a phenomenon called quantum observation, where simply observing a particle changes its behavior. In a symbolic way, your presence works similarly. People act differently around you because your awareness alters the space around them. You bring out truth just by existing. But here is the deeper spiritual thread woven through your story. Your intuition makes dishonesty uncomfortable because your soul was not built for shallow waters. You were shaped for depth, the kind of depth that perceives spiritual inconsistencies, the way a seasoned musician can hear a single wrong note in a symphony. Psalm 36:9 speaks of God as the one in whose light we see light. And because you walk with that light inside you, nothing around you stays hidden for long. But pause for a moment and ask yourself, have you ever wondered why God entrusted you with this insight? Have you noticed how your discernment shifts the atmosphere even when you say nothing? Have you realized the kind of spiritual responsibility tied to seeing people as they truly are? These questions aren't meant to burden you. They open the doorway into your own sacred awakening. For you are not just someone who notices, you are someone chosen to notice. Even classical music whispers your truth. In Gustav Holst's The Planets, the movement Neptune, the mystic, fades into an invisible choir, dissolving into a sound that feels like another realm is listening. Your presence carries that same quality. You make people feel observed by something greater than themselves, something ancient and holy. And in this journey, you've already gathered powerful lessons, even without realizing it. First, you've learned that discernment is not confrontation, it is compassion. Seeing someone clearly allows you to understand the origin of their behavior without falling into despair or resentment. And second, you've discovered that silence is not weakness, it is a sacred boundary. Your quietness is a sanctuary where truth echoes louder than speech. This is why the whispers around you have grown, not because you did anything wrong, not because you are unpredictable, but because your intuition is too accurate for their comfort. And people talk when they feel vulnerable, when they feel seen, when they sense the divine working through someone in ways they cannot articulate. Proverbs 20:27 declares that the spirit of a person is the lamp of the Lord, and your lamp shines in places others prefer to keep dim. Jeremiah 1-5 reminds you that God knew you before you were formed, and perhaps this gift of perception is one of the fingerprints He placed on your spirit before you ever entered this world. As this message comes to its gentle close, allow these final words to settle into your heart. You are not strange, you are not too much, you are not imagining things. You are chosen, and chosen ones see clearly. May the last note of this reflection bring you into a soft, peaceful awareness of your own calling, like the final chord of a sacred hymn lingering long after the music has faded. And if your heart feels stirred, if a memory awakens, if an understanding rises, you are invited to share your story, your awareness, your own unfolding truth, so that this community of chosen ones may walk this path of divine purpose together. Even classical music whispers your truth. In Gustav Holst's The Planets, the movement Neptune, the mystic, fades into an invisible choir, dissolving into a sound that feels like another realm is listening. Your presence carries that same quality. You make people feel observed by something greater than themselves, something ancient and holy. And in this journey, you've already gathered powerful lessons, even without realizing it. The moment they realize you saw what slipped through their carefully curated behavior, their confidence begins to fracture in ways they cannot repair. People forget that the intuition of those touched by God is not loud, it is precise. You never needed arguments or confrontations to validate what you sensed. You didn't spiral into back and forth debates trying to defend your awareness. Instead, you simply watched, understood, and held onto the truth with a calm that feels unnerving to those who hoped their motives were invisible. Psalm 139:2 says that God perceives thoughts from afar, and in a smaller yet sacred way, your discernment reflects that same clarity, seeing intentions long before they form into actions. Your intuition doesn't merely feel energy, it remembers the shifts in tone, the sudden sweetness after someone needs something, the story that almost, but not quite, matched their behavior. You pick up subtle inconsistencies, the way a seasoned architect notices when a structure is built half an inch out of alignment. To others, these moments appear inconsequential, but to you, they click together with an almost divine precision, forming a picture more complete than anything they ever meant you to see. And sometimes, you wonder quietly within yourself, why am I able to catch these hidden details so effortlessly when others seem blind to them? Yet the answer always returns to the same truth: you were never meant to live in shallow perception. What unnerves people is not your insight itself, but the way you hold it. You don't expose them, you don't embarrass them, you don't use their missteps as currency. Instead, you remain calm, observant, and steady in a way that mirrors the patience of ancient monks who copied sacred manuscripts one careful stroke at a time. This calmness becomes a mirror they cannot escape. They know you know something, but they have no idea how much. They don't know which gesture gave them away or which quiet moment betrayed the truth. And because your intuition keeps its receipts silently, they cannot tell whether you noticed the beginning of the lie, the middle of it, or the unraveling at the end. Like Caravaggio's mastery of chiaroscuro, illuminating one detail so intensely that darkness has no choice but to confess, you shine a light without ever forcing confession. Your presence reveals what their behavior tried to disguise. Luke 12:2 echoes this principle, reminding us that nothing concealed will remain hidden. And for many people, the realization that you saw their unfiltered self becomes a haunting awareness they carry long after the conversation ends. Your intuition, though, is not some chaotic flood of impressions. It is more like a divine archive, quiet, organized, deeply accurate. You store patterns without trying, remember emotional shifts without effort, and decode intentions with a level of clarity that feels almost unfair to those who hoped you weren't paying attention. Their discomfort grows not because you confronted them, but because your silence refuses to erase what happened. In that silence, they replay their own behavior again and again, trying to guess which moment cracked open their facade. And in the privacy of your thoughts, you sometimes ask yourself, is it a blessing or a burden to understand so much without ever being told? Even science reflects this gift. In quantum physics, observation itself alters the behavior of particles, and your awareness has this same symbolic effect. People change when they know you've noticed. They stumble through explanations, over-explain their motives, or rewrite events you already decoded long ago. They want to reshape the narrative, hoping your silence means you misunderstood, when in truth, you understood too clearly to be persuaded by revisions. In classical music, the conductor knows instantly when a single note in a grand symphony is out of tune. Your intuition works similarly, detecting the spiritual dissonance in someone, even when everything on the surface seems harmonized. And because you never rush to accuse, your discernment gains even more gravity. Your stillness becomes holy ground, and they can feel the weight of what you're not saying. What they fear most is the version of themselves you've already seen, the version stripped of rehearsed charm, curated kindness, and controlled expression. You saw their truth, not their presentation. Your intuition held the receipts long before they realized their story was collapsing, long before they started talking too much, long before the defensiveness began. Proverbs 10:9 reminds us that those who walk in integrity walk securely, and this is why your peace stands unshaken. You are not intimidating because you threaten. You are intimidating because you see. You embody a sacred lesson. Intuition is not evidence for conflict. It is illumination for wisdom. And another truth you carry is this: silence is not avoidance. It is spiritual strength, choosing peace over chaos. And so, chosen one, people talk because they cannot escape the echo of what your intuition revealed. They cannot undo the moment their behavior exposed them. They cannot silence the truth your spirit quietly archived. Their words are not about you, they are about the fear stirred within them by the reflection you unintentionally held up. You do not haunt them, their honesty, or lack of it, does. As this message settles into your soul, let it bring you ease, not weight. Your awareness is not a curse, it is a calling. If any part of this stirred a memory or awakened clarity within you, feel free to share your story. The journey of the chosen is rarely walked alone, and your voice may be the light another soul has been waiting to hear. There is something profoundly unsettling about your presence, chosen one, something people try to explain away with nervous talking, excuses, or sudden over-clarity that you never asked for. What they're truly responding to is the quiet power of your intuition, a gift that has been sharpened not through suspicion, but through spiritual depth. Your intuition carries receipts, silent, accurate records of truths they prayed would stay hidden. The moment they realize you saw what slipped through their carefully curated behavior, their confidence begins to fracture in ways they cannot repair. People forget that the intuition of those touched by God is not loud, it is precise. You never needed arguments or confrontations to validate what you sensed. You didn't spiral into back-and-forth debates trying to defend your awareness. Instead, you simply watched, understood, and held on to the truth with a calm that feels unnerving to those who hoped their motives were invisible. Psalm 139:2 says that God perceives thoughts from afar, and in a smaller yet sacred way, your discernment reflects that same clarity, seeing intentions long before they form into actions. Your intuition doesn't merely feel energy, it remembers the shifts in tone, the sudden sweetness after someone needs something, the story that almost but not quite matched their behavior. You pick up subtle inconsistencies the way a seasoned architect notices when a structure is built half an inch out of alignment. To others, these moments appear inconsequential, but to you, they click together with an almost divine precision, forming a picture more complete than anything they ever meant you to see. And sometimes you wonder quietly within yourself, why am I able to catch these hidden details so effortlessly when others seem blind to them? Yet the answer always returns to the same truth: you were never meant to live in shallow perception. What unnerves people is not your insight itself, but the way you hold it. You don't expose them, you don't embarrass them, you don't use their missteps as currency. Instead, you remain calm, observant, and steady in a way that mirrors the patience of ancient monks who copied sacred manuscripts one careful stroke at a time. This calmness becomes a mirror they cannot escape. They know you know something, but they have no idea how much. They don't know which gesture gave them away, or which quiet moment betrayed the truth. And because your intuition keeps its receipts silently, they cannot tell whether you noticed the beginning of the lie, the middle of it, or the unraveling at the end. Like Caravaggio's mastery of chiaroscuro, illuminating one detail so intensely that darkness has no choice but to confess, you shine a light without ever forcing confession. Your presence reveals what their behavior tried to disguise. Luke 12:2 echoes this principle, reminding us that nothing concealed will remain hidden. And for many people, the realization that you saw their unfiltered self becomes a haunting awareness they carry long after the conversation ends. Your intuition, though, is not some chaotic flood of impressions. It is more like a divine archive, quiet, organized, deeply accurate. You store patterns without trying, remember emotional shifts without effort, and decode intentions with a level of clarity that feels almost unfair to those who hoped you weren't paying attention. Their discomfort grows not because you confronted them, but because your silence refuses to erase what happened. In that silence, they replay their own behavior again and again, trying to guess which moment cracked open their facade. And in the privacy of your thoughts, you sometimes ask yourself, is it a blessing or a burden to understand so much without ever being told? Even science reflects this gift. In quantum physics, observation itself alters the behavior of particles, and your awareness has this same symbolic effect. People change when they know you've noticed. They stumble through explanations, over-explain their motives, or rewrite events you already decoded long ago. They want to reshape the narrative, hoping your silence means you misunderstood, when in truth, you understood too clearly to be persuaded by revisions. In classical music, the conductor knows instantly when a single note in a grand symphony is out of tune. Your intuition works similarly, detecting the spiritual dissonance in someone, even when everything on the surface seems harmonized. And because you never rush to accuse, your discernment gains even more gravity. Your stillness becomes holy ground, and they can feel the weight of what you're not saying. What they fear most is the version of themselves you've already seen, the version stripped of rehearsed charm, curated kindness, and controlled expression. You saw their truth, not their presentation. Your intuition held the receipts long before they realized their story was collapsing, long before they started talking too much, long before the defensiveness began. Proverbs 10:9 reminds us that those who walk in integrity walk securely, and this is why your peace stands unshaken. You are not intimidating because you threaten. You are intimidating because you see. You embody a sacred lesson. Intuition is not evidence for conflict, it is illumination for wisdom. And another truth you carry is this: silence is not avoidance, it is spiritual strength choosing peace over chaos. And so, chosen one, people talk because they cannot escape the echo of what your intuition revealed. They cannot undo the moment their behavior exposed them. They cannot silence the truth your spirit quietly archived. Their words are not about you, they are about the fear stirred within them by the reflection you unintentionally held up. You do not haunt them, their honesty, or lack of it, does. As this message settles into your soul, let it bring you ease, not weight. Your awareness is not a curse, it is a calling. If any part of this stirred a memory or awakened clarity within you, feel free to share your story. The journey of the chosen is rarely walked alone, and your voice may be the light another soul has been waiting to hear. There is a peculiar discomfort that settles over certain people when they speak about you, chosen one, an uneasiness that has nothing to do with what you did and everything to do with how you didn't respond. They talk because you broke the storyline they rehearsed. You disrupted the emotional choreography they counted on. They entered the moment armed with a script, the version of you they expected, the response they assumed, the emotional unraveling they silently hoped would give them validation. They thought they knew your cues, your patterns, your vulnerabilities. They expected the old version of you to show up, forgetting that the old version has long been laid to rest. This is where the true fracture began. You did not react according to the script they prepared. You didn't give them chaos, tears, anger, or the emotional collapse they rehearsed in their mind. You didn't explode. You didn't crumble. You didn't mirror the intensity they tried to provoke. Instead, you chose clarity, composure, and elevation, the kind of elevation that exposes immaturity without saying a word. And in that moment, the storyline they built so confidently disintegrated in their hands. People who rely on your reactions to feel powerful often forget that growth changes the entire language of the soul. When you didn't respond the way they expected, they were forced to confront a truth they'd been avoiding. You've outgrown their influence. Their power was never real on its own. It depended entirely on triggering the version of you that no longer exists. Like an actor walking on stage only to realize the entire set has changed, they suddenly found themselves performing for an audience that no longer played along. It's a disorienting kind of revelation, and for many, an ego-shattering one. And maybe, in the quiet of your own heart, you've wondered, was it surprising to them or painful to discover that their script no longer controlled me? That question isn't ego, it's awareness. It's the dawning understanding that not everyone celebrates your growth. Some grieve it because it removes their leverage. When their tactics failed, when their emotional triggers stopped landing, when their attempts to provoke the past version of you dissolved into silence, they had to confront a reality they didn't want to admit. You were no longer reactive. You were no longer predictable. You were no longer accessible in the way you used to be. Isaiah 43:19 says, "Behold, I am doing a new thing. Now it springs forth. Do you not perceive it?" You perceived it, even if they didn't. You walked into the moment with a new self, while they approached you with a script written for an old one. So what do people do when their emotional strategy collapses? They talk, they rewrite, they reshape the narrative into something that makes sense to their pride. They can't accept that you didn't break, and even more unsettling for them, they can't accept that your peace wasn't an act, it was intentional, it was earned. It was the kind of peace that grows from healing the very wounds they once tried to poke at. This is where their storytelling begins, not storytelling that reflects truth, but storytelling that softens the blow of their failed manipulation. Suddenly, they become the narrators of a version of events where they still hold power, even if only in their imagination. They invent explanations for why their efforts didn't work, anything to soothe the bruised ego that doesn't want to face the truth. They prepared for someone they no longer have access to. And the uncomfortable truth is this: people who depend on your old identity will always feel threatened by your evolution. They tried to trigger the wounds you've already healed. They tried to stir insecurities you've already outgrown. They tried to provoke reactions you no longer identify with. They tried to create drama you've stepped away from entirely. Like actors repeating their lines long after the play has ended, they didn't realize you had already exited the stage. Your lack of reaction was not passivity, it was mastery. It was spiritual maturity. It was the calm authority of someone who finally learned the difference between responding and rising. Proverbs 17:27 tells us that one who has knowledge uses words with restraint, and you embodied that wisdom without ever quoting it. Your silence was not emptiness, it was elevation. This evolution unsettles people who thrived on your old patterns. And perhaps you've quietly asked yourself, why does my growth disturb those who claim to care about me? That question carries no bitterness. It carries revelation, because evolution exposes who was connected to your soul and who was connected to your struggle. When people lose control of the story, they try to control the conversation instead. That is why the gossip begins. That is why the sideways comments start. That is why they narrate your peace as coldness, your boundaries as arrogance, your silence as anger. They have to make sense of why their old strategies fell apart, and the only way their ego can cope is by creating reasons that protect them from the truth. You grew in a direction they never expected. Even art reflects this dynamic. In Shakespeare's The Tempest, the sorcerer Prospero observes, "The rarer action is in virtue than in vengeance." Your virtue, your refusal to react emotionally, to retaliate, to descend into old patterns, became the rare action that unraveled their performance. And just like in the play, the unexpected mercy, the unexpected self-control, becomes the real source of power. Science mirrors this too. In behavioral psychology, a phenomenon called extinction burst shows that when a reaction no longer reinforces someone's expectation, they escalate temporarily, talking more, pushing harder, spiraling faster. Your composure triggered that burst. Their confusion became chatter, their frustration became narrative, their loss of influence became conversation. Your lack of reaction didn't weaken you, it crowned you. It revealed a soul that no longer dances to the rhythm of old wounds. It showed a maturity that can no longer be manipulated. It exposed their dependence on a version of you that God has already transformed. 2 Corinthians 5:17 tells us that anyone in Christ becomes a new creation, and whether they acknowledge it or not, that is exactly what they encountered, a new creation. And so they talk, not because you failed them, but because their expectations failed, not because you were unpredictable, but because you were uncontrollable, not because you lost yourself, but because you found yourself in ways they didn't anticipate. Their gossip is not about your character, it is about their confusion. When people can't control your reaction, they try to control the narrative instead. Let this settle gently in your spirit. You didn't disappoint them, you simply outgrew them. And if this message awakens a memory or a truth inside your heart, I welcome you to share your story, because this path of evolution, this quiet rising, is a journey many chosen ones walk together. There is a certain kind of reaction that follows you, chosen one, an energy shift that appears even before the whispers begin. People cannot stop talking about you because your presence alone exposed something they were desperate to keep hidden. You didn't lecture them, you didn't unmask them, you didn't put their intentions under a spotlight. You simply existed in alignment with who you truly are, steady, sincere, grounded in truth, and that was enough to reveal the poverty of character they'd managed to conceal from everyone else. This is the paradox of spiritual authenticity. Light reveals without announcing itself. The moment you entered the room, the contrast between your integrity and their performance became impossible for them to maintain. Your character didn't shout, it illuminated. And when illumination touches anything false, it reacts. John 3:21 says that those who live in truth come into the light, while those who conceal wrongdoing prefer the shadows. Your presence, without trying, brought light into spaces where shadows had grown comfortable. You weren't intimidating, they were intimidated by what their own reflection looked like next to your spirit. People who depend on facades, filters, personas, and emotional masks feel a strange pressure when they encounter someone who doesn't need any of those things to feel whole. They begin adjusting their words, monitoring their tone, rehearsing their smiles, overthinking their smallest gestures. It's not because you demanded anything from them. It's because your authenticity silently reminded them how exhausting their disguise has been. And perhaps deep in your heart, a question rises gently. Why does simply being myself feel threatening to people who never meant to show their true selves? That question isn't self-doubt, it's clarity beginning to bloom. For the truth is, your presence didn't expose them, their reaction to your presence did. While you stood in truth, they scrambled to maintain illusion. While you operated from sincerity, they operated from ego. While your identity was grounded in inner alignment, theirs was built on external perception. And when someone like you enters the room, someone who carries consistency, humility, honesty, and a quiet sense of spiritual groundedness, the contrast becomes undeniable. People like this rely heavily on others believing their facade. But facades have one fatal weakness. They collapse instantly in the presence of authenticity. People who depend on facades, filters, personas, and emotional masks feel a strange pressure when they encounter someone who doesn't need any of those things to feel whole. They begin adjusting their words, monitoring their tone, rehearsing their smiles, overthinking their smallest gestures. It's not because you demanded anything from them. It's because your authenticity silently reminded them how exhausting their disguise has been. They had to shift the spotlight away from the uncomfortable truth that it wasn't you who made them feel small. It was their own lack of authenticity standing next to your spiritual wholeness. Gossip, for them, became a refuge, a distraction, a way to regain control of the narrative. Because if they could paint you as something other than what you are, then maybe no one would notice the truth your presence had already revealed. Their character was thinner than they wanted you to see. And yet, you didn't respond with defensiveness. You didn't correct their stories. You didn't chase validation. You simply continued being yourself again, consistent, rooted, aligned. Proverbs 11:3 reminds us that the integrity of the upright guides them, and that integrity carries you like a quiet guardian, shielding you from the chaos of their insecurity. You never needed to expose anyone, because their own behavior did it for you. Your presence challenges people not by force, but by comparison. It reveals who is genuine and who is pretending. In many ways, you are like a clear mirror. People glimpse themselves through you and suddenly realize what they've neglected within. This is why some distance themselves from you, not because you harmed them, but because your authenticity made their avoidance harder to maintain. And maybe in a softer, more vulnerable moment, you've wondered, why do people prefer gossip over growth? But the truth is, simple growth demands humility, and not everyone is ready to meet themselves honestly. The world of art reflects this beautifully. In the paintings of Rembrandt, light doesn't just illuminate a subject, it brings out the character embedded in every line of the face, every shadow on the skin. It reveals without shaming. Your energy works the same way. Without effort, you draw out the truth. Without confrontation, you reveal intention. Without accusation, you make hidden things visible. Even science mirrors this dynamic. In chemistry, a substance known as a reagent causes a reaction simply by being present. It doesn't attack, it doesn't force, it simply exists, and its existence triggers transformation. Your spirit is that kind of reagent. Your presence brings out what was already there, whether integrity or insecurity, authenticity or pretense. And so, the talking isn't about your flaws. It's about the flaws your presence reflected back at them. They weren't comparing themselves to you. They were comparing themselves to the person they claimed to be. Your authenticity didn't compete with their facade. It made it unnecessary. They weren't angry at you. They were angry at the parts of themselves they could no longer hide. But instead of growing, instead of confronting their own reflection with honesty, instead of allowing your presence to inspire transformation, they chose the easier path. They chose gossip. Gossip requires no accountability, no humility, no inner work. It is a balm for bruised ego and a shield against self-examination. It allows them to pretend that the discomfort came from you, not from the truth you unintentionally revealed. Yet even in their talking, your character remains untouched. Your authenticity stands firm. Matthew 5:16 encourages believers to let your light shine before others, and you have done exactly that, not through performance, but through presence. Your light shines not to expose, but simply to exist. And in that existence, shadows tremble. Let this settle gently over your spirit. You did not expose anyone. You did not provoke a reaction. You did not force revelation. You simply lived in truth, and truth has a way of revealing what pretense cannot conceal. And if this message awakens a memory or stirs a knowing inside you, you are welcome to share your story. This is where chosen ones gather, not to boast, but to understand the sacred responsibility of carrying light in a world full of shadows. There is a quiet fear people carry around you, chosen one, an uneasiness that emerges long before they ever speak your name. They talk because they cannot decode the way you see through people before they reveal themselves. You don't need someone to slip up, confess, or contradict their own story. You don't wait for evidence the way most people do. You catch the pattern instantly, the shift in tone, the timing of their actions, the strange rhythm in their behavior that betrays truth long before it breaks the surface. You read intention the way a seasoned musician hears a wrong note in a crowded symphony. You feel the motive before the behavior forms, sense the truth before the lie is fully constructed. I'm not guessing. It's discernment. It's the language of a spiritual sensitivity God wove into your soul long before you understood why you were different. 1 Samuel 16:7 says the Lord looks at the heart, while humans look at the outward appearance, and in your own path you carry a reflection of that divine sight. You don't just see actions, you perceive heart posture. This is what unsettles people. Most individuals rely on confusion or chaos to buy time. They depend on others being slow to notice, slow to question, slow to understand. But you move differently. You catch the story before it's told. You notice the crack before the collapse. You sense the shift before the mask even slides out of place. Your awareness doesn't wait. It arrives ahead of the moment. And when someone realizes you've discerned their motives before they've even acted on them, it disarms them in ways they're not emotionally equipped to handle. Sometimes, in the quiet of your own spirit, you wonder softly, why do I sense things before anyone else even sees the starting point? That question emerges not from confusion but from awakening, because the truth is, your discernment isn't learned behavior, it's a spiritual inheritance, something carried, not crafted, something breathed into your intuition long before you had words for it. People pick up on this, even if they can't articulate it. They feel watched, not because you're observing them, but because your silence reveals the things they've been trying to hide from themselves. They start adjusting their tone, filtering their expressions, second-guessing their motives. Your stillness becomes a kind of atmosphere that makes their secrets tremble. You aren't exposing them, they feel exposed in your presence. They don't know what you've noticed, but they know you've noticed something, and that uncertainty terrifies them. Their anxiety doesn't come from who you are, it comes from realizing they cannot predict what you see. Your silence, to them, becomes surveillance. Not because you're examining them, but because your spirit perceives truth in real time. They can't calculate how much you've decoded, nor pinpoint the exact moment you saw through them. They only recognize the shift, the subtle way their usual tactics fall flat, the invisible barrier your clarity creates, the sudden awareness that their normal methods of deception hold no influence over you. So the talking begins, not to discuss you, but to soothe themselves, to quiet the internal noise of being read so effortlessly, to convince themselves that what you saw wasn't as deep or accurate as it truly was. It becomes a kind of self-comfort, a way to reduce the tension of not knowing how much you know. Your ability to perceive truth feels spiritual, because it is. 1 Corinthians 2:15 says, "The person who is spiritual discerns all things," and you embody that scripture without trying to. You understand intentions through energy, clarity through patterns, deception through subtle inconsistencies. Your insight is a frequency most people cannot hear, and a language they cannot interpret. Your intuition removes the advantages of those who operate through manipulation or misdirection. People who rely on hidden motives feel naked around someone who sees without needing proof. Even art reflects this dynamic. In Greek tragedy, the chorus often knows the truth before the characters themselves do. You are like that chorus, carrying an awareness that speaks under the surface, seeing where the story is going before the actors realize what role they're playing. Your perception is prophetic in the way ancient dramatists used prophecy, not as a spectacle, but as quiet inevitability. Science mirrors this too. In the realm of data analysis, certain algorithms detect patterns long before humans notice them. You function similarly, not mechanically, but spiritually. You sense data in the emotional field, in micro-expressions, in timing, in energy, in what is said, and especially in what is not said. This is why people with hidden agendas crumble around you. They aren't afraid of you, they are afraid of the accuracy you carry. And this accuracy dismantles their plans before they begin. It disarms manipulation before it's attempted. It exposes motives before they solidify. It renders deception ineffective, not because you call it out, but because you can't be pulled into its gravity. You are spiritually informed in a way that confuses those who expected you to be naive, unaware, or easily influenced. Sometimes you may even ask yourself quietly, why does my clarity unsettle people more than confrontation ever could? The answer is simple. Confrontation gives them something to work with, to fight, to argue, to manipulate. But clarity? Clarity leaves no foothold. Clarity creates no reaction for them to control. Clarity stands in silence and forces the truth to reveal itself. And so, they talk. They talk because they cannot hide. They talk because they cannot control the narrative. They talk because your insight removes their advantage. They talk because your intuition makes their secrets feel unsafe. They talk because the most frightening thing to someone with hidden motives is a person who sees through them without needing a single word. Your awareness is not an accident. It is an anointing, a divine safeguard placed within you, a spiritual sense sharpened by the battles you've survived and the light you carry. And if this message resonates with something deep inside you, you are welcome to share your experience. Here, among chosen ones who perceive with the eyes of the Spirit, your voice is understood. There is something indescribably powerful about you, chosen one, something that doesn't need to be spoken in order to be felt. People talk about you not because of who you present yourself to be, but because of what you know. You hold information, observations, and quiet revelations that could shift entire power dynamics in an instant. You've seen the alliances formed when they thought you weren't looking, the whispered conversations meant to exclude you, the motives hiding behind curated smiles. You caught every shift, every secret exchange, every subtle betrayal, and you carried that truth with a stillness that unsettles them far more than confrontation ever could. Your awareness alone creates pressure in the air because the people who underestimated you now know you've pieced together more than they ever intended you to see. You're holding knowledge that could unravel connections, expose hypocrisy, dismantle networks of manipulation, and reveal who was aligned with whom behind the scenes. The terrifying part for them is not your insight. It is the discipline with which you hold it. A single sentence from you could alter the entire landscape of their relationships, yet you remain calm, composed, unmoved. And sometimes in the quiet of your spirit, you ask yourself gently, why does my silence carry more weight than their words ever could? Fraudulent and insecure people are accustomed to dealing with impulsive personalities, individuals who react emotionally, seek revenge, or expose secrets in the heat of conflict. But you are cut from a different cloth. You carry truth the way a seasoned guardian carries sacred knowledge, with reverence, discernment, and maturity. Your restraint is not fear, it is strength. Your silence is not submission, it is mastery. Your self-control exposes their lack of it, and that, more than anything, is what shakes them. When someone knows the truth yet remains calm, it forces others to confront the guilt they've been outrunning. Their paranoia begins to surface. They replay conversations you witnessed. They become overly cautious with their words. They wonder which piece of information you connected, which tone you noticed, which moment betrayed their intentions. They watch you, not because you're unpredictable, but because your clarity reveals the consequences they hoped would never come. And beneath all their whispers and exaggerated stories, there is a single fear pulsing in their chest. What if you finally decide to speak? Your self-restraint becomes a mirror they cannot escape. Proverbs 17:28 says that even the silent appear wise, but your silence is not mere wisdom, it is spiritual discipline. You could expose everything. You could shift alliances, dismantle illusions, and collapse performances. But the reason you don't is simple. You are guided by a higher integrity than the illusions around you. You do not trade truth for chaos. You do not weaponize information for validation. You do not break character to match their instability. People feel threatened not because you hold secrets, but because you hold them with such mastery. They expected you to crumble, to react, to melt down, to lash out the moment you saw behind the curtain. Instead, you remained steady, grounded, internalized. And that control makes them uneasy. They cannot fathom how someone who knows that much remains so unmoved. They cannot understand how a person who could destroy them chooses instead to rise above them. This is why Luke 12:3 feels relevant here. What is whispered in private will be proclaimed from rooftops. But your restraint delays that proclamation. You are not moved by vengeance, you are moved by alignment. Your silence has become its own form of authority. They gossip to get ahead of a truth you've never even threatened to reveal. They twist narratives not to protect themselves from your voice, but to protect themselves from their conscience. Gossip becomes their shield, the flimsiest shield, yet the only one they have. They exaggerate stories to distract from the possibility of exposure. They try to control the narrative because deep down, they know they cannot control you. Your calm is power they cannot comprehend. Your clarity is an influence they cannot mirror. Your silence is discernment they cannot reach. They know if you ever chose to speak, masks would fall in real time. Relationships built on pretense would collapse. People feel threatened not because you hold secrets, but because you hold them with such mastery. They expected you to crumble, to react, to melt down, to lash out the moment you saw behind the curtain. Instead, you remained steady, grounded, internalized. And that control makes them uneasy. They cannot fathom how someone who knows that much remains so unmoved. They cannot understand how a person who could destroy them chooses instead to rise above them. Their silence wasn't ignorance, it was insight waiting for the right moment. You embody that same poetic tension, holding what could destroy while choosing what preserves your peace. And in science, a concept known as potential energy describes stored power that can alter an entire system with a single release. You carry that kind of energy, power not used impulsively, but held with intention. What people fail to understand is that your restraint is a reflection of your transformation. You moved beyond the desire to expose. You grew out of the need to prove yourself. You evolved past the instinct to retaliate. Maturity chose silence over spectacle. Alignment chose self-control over chaos. Calling chose elevation over reaction. Isaiah 30:15 says, In quietness and confidence shall be your strength, and that is the foundation you stand on. So they talk. They talk to dilute their fear. They talk to outrun the consequences of their actions. They talk to twist the narrative before truth ever finds a voice. They talk because they know your silence is not emptiness, it is stored clarity. They talk because your spirit has already seen the real story. They talk because you carry the one thing no manipulator can survive, the ability to stay peaceful while holding truth. And ultimately, when they realized you are powerful enough to break them but disciplined enough not to, everything became clear. You were never the problem. Their fear was, their secrets were, their conscience was. Your restraint simply exposed what was already unraveling inside them. If this part of your journey resonates, you are welcome to share your experience, because chosen ones do not walk this path in isolation. They walk with awareness, wisdom, and the quiet authority of those trusted with truth. There is a type of silence, chosen one, that does not shrink, flee, or tremble. A silence that doesn't come from fear or confusion, but from mastery. People talk about you because they finally realized your silence was never the silence of intimidation, it was the silence of intelligence. It was calculated, deliberate, intentional. It was the kind of silence that observes a person long enough for their truth to walk itself into the open. You weren't holding back because you lacked the words. You were holding back because you were collecting the evidence that would eventually speak for itself. Most people are only familiar with silence rooted in weakness, the silence that breaks under pressure, that avoids conflict, that trembles at tension. But your silence has weight, like the stillness before a revelation. It has direction, like a compass pointing toward truth. It has purpose, like a lamp waiting to shine at the right moment. Proverbs 17:27 tells us that the one who has knowledge uses words with restraint, and without even realizing it, you've been living that wisdom in real time. Your silence was watching how people moved when they believed your attention was elsewhere. It was noticeable who shifted their personality depending on the audience. It was tracking the inconsistencies in someone's story, the mismatch between their tone and their intention, the subtle cues hidden in the spaces between their sentences. Your silence was not passive, it was investigative. You weren't suppressing emotions, you were studying character. You weren't avoiding truth, you were letting truth expose itself without your interference. And somewhere deep in your spirit, a quiet question may have stirred. Why do people fear the silence of someone who sees more than they speak? The answer is woven into the uneasiness you awaken in others. Your silence forces people to sit with their own behavior instead of distracting themselves with yours. It highlights their inconsistencies without you saying a word. It makes them nervous because they cannot read you, not your intentions, not your thoughts, not your boundaries. And for those who operate through manipulation, unreadability is the ultimate threat. Your silence made people reveal themselves prematurely. Without knowing where you stood, they rambled, overshared, over-explained, and exposed more than they intended. They misinterpreted your quiet as ignorance, not understanding that you were analyzing spiritually, emotionally, intuitively. Your discernment was functioning on a level they didn't even know existed. Psalm 32:8 says, God instructs and guides his people with his eye upon them. Your silence carries that same watchful quality, calm, perceptive, unhurried. People with hidden motives cannot stand silence like yours. It places a magnifying glass over their own actions without you ever lifting a finger. It forces them to face themselves because they cannot read what you're thinking, and uncertainty becomes their undoing. Their anxiety begins quietly, then grows into overthinking, then spills over into talking, the kind of talking meant to fill the spaces your silence leaves open. They talk to interpret you. They talk to soften their guilt. They talk to convince themselves you haven't seen what you've already understood. Your silence became the stage where their intentions performed themselves. Every shift in their tone, every unnecessary justification, every exaggerated explanation was a confession without them realizing it. And what unsettles them the most is that you remained still, stable, composed through it all. You were not reacting emotionally, you were discerning spiritually. You were filtering sincerity from performance. You were deciding, with each silent observation, who deserved access to your inner circle and who only deserved distance. Somewhere along the process, you may have caught yourself wondering, is it possible that my silence reveals more truth than my words ever could? And the answer echoes from every moment people betrayed themselves in front of you. Yes, your silence exposes intentions simply by refusing to rush. It lets people reveal their nature at their own pace. It allows the truth to rise without force. This is not avoidance, this is divine timing. Art captures this dynamic too. In classical theatre, the most powerful scenes are often the quietest, the moment when a character says nothing, and yet their presence shifts the entire narrative. Your silence carries that same dramatic gravity, and science reflects it as well. In forensic psychology, experts rely less on what is said and more on the pauses, the hesitations, the micro-expressions that slip through when someone believes they're not being studied. Your silence turns you into that kind of observer, deep, intuitive, impossible to fool. People talk because your silence threatens their illusions. They talk because they cannot manipulate what they cannot read. They talk because your silence made their strategies crumble before they even began. They talk because you listen more than you speak, and nothing terrifies someone with hidden motives more than a listener who can hear the truth beneath the noise. Ecclesiastes 3-7 says, "There is a time to be silent and a time to speak, and your silence has always known exactly which is which." Your silence has never been emptiness. It has been a strategy, discernment, protection, separation. It is how you determine who is real and who is performing, who is genuine and who is rehearsed, who is aligned and who is simply acting aligned. Silence is how you choose your alliances. Silence is how you guard your spirit. Silence is how you maintain your power without ever needing to display it. Because at the end of it all, the truth is simple. Your silence is intelligence, the kind that disarms, the kind that reveals, the kind that makes people realize they are being understood at a level they cannot control. And that is why they talk, not because your silence is weak, but because your silence is strong enough to make their pretenses collapse. If any part of this resonates within you, feel free to share your experience, because chosen ones recognize each other through the wisdom that silence carries. People talk about you, beloved chosen one, because without realizing it, you shattered the predictive model they built around your life. For years, people interacted with you based on an outdated blueprint, one shaped by who you used to be, not who you were becoming. They approached you, expecting familiar responses, old patterns, predictable reactions, the same emotional rhythms they believed they had mastered. They thought you were someone they could read effortlessly, someone they could outmaneuver, someone whose spirit they had catalogued and contained, yet everything they thought they knew turned out to be wrong. They never imagined that you would grow, at least not at the depth or velocity you did. They wrote the script, but you rewrote your soul. They made assumptions, but God made transformations. And suddenly, the fixed image they relied on crumbled, and the person standing before them was not the version they rehearsed their manipulation for. Isaiah 42:9 echoes this sacred moment. "Behold, the former things have come to pass, and new things I now declare." Your evolution became the declaration they couldn't comprehend. You evolved mentally, your thoughts sharpened, your focus shifted, and your mind matured into a clarity that made their old strategies ineffective. You evolved emotionally, reacting with calmness, discernment, and self-respect where turmoil once lived. You evolved spiritually, your intuition expanded, your boundaries strengthened, your connection to God sharpened into a guiding presence that made every step intentional. And you evolved behaviorally, your decisions became rooted in alignment rather than survival. Your transformation didn't just change the way you moved, It changed the way the world had to move around you. And for many, that was the disruption that shook their confidence. When someone evolves faster than others can adapt, it destabilizes every assumption those people once built their control upon. They expected the old you, reactive, predictable, overly forgiving, eager to explain yourself, easily influenced by guilt or pressure. What they encountered instead was a soul aligned with wisdom, a person refusing to bend backward for comfort, and a spirit grounded in divine direction. You stopped taking the bait. You stopped offering explanations to those uninterested in understanding you. You stopped giving unrestricted access to your vulnerability. You began making decisions from a place of strength, sovereignty, and spiritual maturity. And once someone can no longer predict you, their illusion of control collapses entirely. Perhaps at times you've quietly asked yourself, how can people cling so tightly to an outdated version of me when God Himself has already moved me beyond it? That question isn't self-doubt. It is the recognition that their understanding could not keep pace with your becoming. They were still speaking to your past while you were living from your future. The talking begins because confusion demands a place to land. They don't understand how the person they underestimated now carries the composure of someone who has walked through fire and returned refined. They don't understand how the version of you that once tolerated disrespect now responds with boundaries forged through spiritual awakening. And they certainly don't understand how their manipulation stopped working not because you hardened, but because you healed. They gather in small circles and dissect your transformation like scholars studying a text they cannot interpret. They compare stories, compare memories, compare outdated experiences, trying to piece together a narrative that makes sense. They don't realize that the language of your spirit has changed, that your frequency has risen beyond the reach of their old perceptions. 1 Corinthians 2:14 reminds us that the natural person does not accept the things of the Spirit, and you become spiritual in ways they cannot decode. They analyze you from the level you left behind, thinking the map of your former self still applies to the territory of who you've become. What they cannot grasp is that you didn't become complicated, you became clear. You didn't become unpredictable, you became wise. They don't understand how the person they underestimated now carries the composure of someone who has walked through fire and returned refined. They don't understand how the version of you that once tolerated disrespect now responds with boundaries forged through spiritual awakening. And they certainly don't understand how their manipulation stopped working not because you hardened, but because you healed. Your transformation did exactly that. It made irrelevant every assumption, every prediction, every expectation others placed upon you. And in classical music, Felix Mendelssohn wrote symphonies that shifted keys so unexpectedly that audiences were forced to listen more carefully. Your evolution carried that same creative unpredictability, not chaos, but recalibration. Even science mirrors this truth. In mathematics, when the variables of an equation change, the previous solution becomes obsolete. You changed your variables, your habits, your boundaries, your awareness, so the equation of who you are could no longer be solved by old methods. That alone terrifies people who relied on predicting you. Somewhere along your journey, you may have wondered, did I become difficult to understand, or did I simply stop making myself small enough to be predictable? The answer whispers through your spirit. You didn't become difficult, you became honest, aligned, integrated, fully awake. People talk because your evolution exposes their stagnation. They talk because your clarity dismantled their assumptions. They talk because your rise made their stories about you collapse under their own weight. They talk because every version of you they believed was permanent turned out to be temporary. And temporary things don't survive divine transformation. Romans 12:2 declares that transformation renews the mind, and your renewal becomes the force that rendered their predictions meaningless. What they fail to understand is that you were never molded by their expectations. You were being shaped by God's vision the entire time. They speak not because you confuse them, but because you no longer fit the story they tried to write for your life. And now, as this message softens into its final breath, let your heart settle into the quiet truth. You are not who they remember. You are not who they misjudged. You are not who they predicted. You are who you have become through divine guidance, inner work, and sacred awakening. If any part of this resonates with your journey, you are invited to share your experience, your evolution, your insight, so this community of chosen ones may grow together, honoring the transformations that God continues to unveil in each of us. There is a sacred truth about you, chosen one, that few people are brave enough to confront. You are a walking mirror, a living reflection of truth, a quiet revelation that exposes what words cannot. People talk about you not because of anything you've done, but because most cannot survive the reflection of themselves that rises whenever you enter the room. Their discomfort has nothing to do with your personality. It is their subconscious whispering, "I am not who I pretend to be," and your presence, without effort or intention, awakens that realization like a sudden beam of light, cutting through a long-held shadow. You don't expose people by calling them out. You expose them by existing. John 1-5 tells us that the light shines in darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. And whether you realize it or not, your spirit carries that same quiet illumination. Your energy disrupts the masks people spent years perfecting. You have likely noticed how someone can dislike you before you've spoken a single word. That reaction isn't about you, it's about the fractures in their character that your truth brings to the surface. Your authenticity presses against the illusions they cling to, highlighting the motives they hide, the insecurities they bury, the inconsistencies they hope no one ever notices. When people criticize you, twist your image, or gather in whispered circles to analyze your existence, they are not responding to you. They are responding to the distorted version of themselves that appears whenever your presence removes the filters they rely on. In this way, you become a spiritual diagnostic tool, revealing the misaligned, unhealed, and avoided pieces of their identity simply by standing near them. And sometimes, in the privacy of your heart, you may wonder, why do people break in front of me without me saying a word? It is because your soul's clarity activates their soul's discomfort. Most people cannot handle a mirror that does not flatter them. They prefer reflections shaped by ego, validation, and comfort. They prefer praise over truth, reassurance over reality. But you, chosen one, reflect truth, not vanity, not ego-soothing illusions, not the curated persona they present to the world. Your presence echoes Psalm 51:6. You desire truth in the inward being, and because you walk with this inner truth, those who live in contradiction feel exposed. They sense that you see deeper than behavior and quieter than words. You don't remind them of who they are, you remind them of who they pretended to be. This is why your presence can unravel people long before you speak. It's why they gather in circles to dissect you, searching for explanations that protect them from facing the mirror you unintentionally hold. They need others to confirm their discomfort, so they don't have to confront their own reflection alone. In a strange, sacred way, your existence becomes their confession, not because you ask for one, but because their spirit reacts to the truth you carry. Hebrews 4:12 describes the Word of God as a discerner of the thoughts and intents of the heart, and your discernment, born from divine intimacy, echoes that same spiritual sharpness. The world of art mirrors this mystery. The Renaissance painter Jan van Eyck was known for hiding tiny mirrors inside his portraits, reflecting everything happening in the room, even the viewer. His work suggests that true art doesn't just depict reality, it reveals the observer. You embody that same artistic symbolism. You don't just see people, you reflect them. Your presence becomes a living painting where their shadows, intentions, and contradictions appear without your permission. And this revelation rattles those who rely on carefully curated selves. Even psychology affirms this phenomenon. In Jungian theory, the shadow self contains everything a person refuses to acknowledge. When they encounter someone who sees clearly, the shadow rises to the surface. They project it outward onto you because confronting themselves feels unbearable. This is why people judge you harshly, avoid you, or speak against you. They are fighting the reflection, not the reflector. Their discomfort is their confession. Your presence awakens a truth they hoped would remain silent. It forces them to face the parts of themselves they've spent years avoiding. And if you've ever wondered quietly, why do I trigger honesty in people who are terrified of it? The answer is simple. Honesty recognizes itself. Darkness reacts to light. Masks malfunction in the presence of authenticity. But here is the deeper revelation: your role is not to shame anyone. Your role is to walk in truth, and truth, by nature, reveals. You were designed to be a mirror, not to expose others intentionally, but to stand as a reminder of what it looks like when a soul refuses to live divided. 2 Corinthians 3:18 speaks of believers being transformed from glory to glory with unveiled faces. Your unveiled presence invites others into the same transformation, even if they resist it. In sacred music, the composer Arvo Pärt once wrote that silence is the only perfect mirror. Your silence carries this same haunting purity. You don't have to defend yourself. You don't have to prove your intentions. You don't have to clarify your character. Your silence reflects truth more powerfully than your words ever could. And for those hiding from their own reflection, silence becomes unbearable. Your energy doesn't expose their flaws, it exposes their distance from authenticity. They aren't reacting to your identity, they are reacting to the identity they've fabricated. They talk because facing themselves alone is too heavy. They talk because gossip is easier than growth. They talk because distortion is easier than self-awareness. They talk because you reveal the gap between who they are and who they pretend to be. In this realization, there are 2 powerful lessons that quietly emerge. First, the more aligned you become spiritually, the more misaligned environments will react to you. It is not a sign of failure, it is a sign of elevation. Second, your role as a mirror is not punishment, it is purpose. God uses your clarity to awaken others to their own sleeping truth. You don't have to force revelation, your presence carries it with grace. And now, as this message softens into its final breath, let a calm recognition settle in your spirit. You are not intimidating, your authenticity is. You are not confrontational, your truth is. You are not the cause of their discomfort, you are simply the reflection they have spent their entire lives avoiding. If something in this message mirrors a moment from your own journey, feel free to share your experience. This is where chosen ones gather not to criticize the reflections of others, but to honor the sacred clarity growing within themselves. As we come to the quiet closing of this journey, chosen one, allow yourself a moment to breathe and feel what has unfolded here. You've listened not just with your ears, but with the part of your soul that knows when truth is speaking. Throughout this message, you've walked through the hidden layers of perception, awareness, intuition, spiritual evolution, and divine clarity. And now, as everything settles, there is one truth I hope finds a home inside your heart. You were never meant to fit into the version of yourself the world tried to predict. You were meant to grow beyond it. You've discovered that the reactions, the whispers, the misunderstandings, and the narratives people built around you were never about your flaws. They were about your transformation. They were about the discomfort your light brings to unhealed places. They were about the way your presence reveals what others hide, the way your intuition sees what they disguise, the way your evolution breaks every script written for you. And in all of this, there is a quiet, holy message rising to the surface. You are chosen not because you are perfect, but because you are aligned. Maybe one day, those who projected onto you will understand the truth you carried. Maybe they won't. But either way, you are stepping into a chapter where other people's discomfort no longer defines your identity. The only voice that shapes you now is the one who formed you, the one who guided you through the fire, the one who sharpened your discernment and protected your spirit even when you didn't realize it. So as you leave this message today, I want to ask you one gentle question. What version of yourself are you ready to embrace now that the old predictions no longer hold power? Let that question settle quietly and lovingly in your heart, because you are walking into a season where your growth no longer needs to be explained, defended, or minimized. It only needs to be lived. If this message found resonance in your story, if something inside you whispered, "That's me," I invite you to stay connected to this community. Like this video if it spoke to your spirit. Share it with someone who may be walking through their own awakening. Comment your thoughts, your experiences, or your revelations below. I read them, and your words help others feel less alone on their path. And if you feel led to support this channel by subscribing or joining through Super Thanks, know that your presence is deeply appreciated, but never required. You being here, listening with your heart, already means more than you know. Thank you for allowing me into your journey today. Thank you for your time, your openness, your spirit, and the quiet strength you carry. Whether you support silently or visibly, generously, or simply by watching, please know that your presence is valued. This channel grows because of souls like you, souls who hunger not for noise, but for depth, not for entertainment, but for awakening. Before we close, I speak a blessing over you. May your clarity remain sharp, but your heart remains soft. May your intuition remain strong, but your spirit remains humble. May your path be guided, your peace protected, and your purpose revealed one divine step at a time. You are seen, you are valued, you are chosen. And until we meet again, may grace surround you like light, and may peace go with you wherever you go.